Thank you so much, Abby and Nathan. It's not bluegrass, but it'll do. In a pinch. But sincerely, thank you to the group of you from Anderson that have sacrificed your time to be with our students this weekend, to Jamie and to all of our volunteers that have been working with our students since Friday. They are, well, actually they're getting ready to take a nap, I think is what they're getting ready to do. But it's been a great weekend for them, and so for everyone that has sacrificed to make it possible, sincerely thank you. There's a couple of kids that Caroline watches in the afternoons that she will pick up from school. And a few weeks ago, there was an appointment of some sort where she couldn't get there in time. She could get back to the house. So what she'd asked me to do is if I would actually go and just get in Caroline, pick them up, drop them off at the house, and then we would be covered. So it's over at Alderman Elementary, which I had not been to. So it's in the middle of a neighborhood. Caroline has told me what I need to do, which entrance to go in, that type of thing. So I'm getting a lot of ringing feedback. So there we go. Anyway, so I get in Caroline, and there are already a stack of vehicles that are that have come out in the street. And that particular school is in a neighborhood, and so it's on this neighborhood street. And I get behind the last car, and I'm just sitting there. School's not quite out, so I'm gonna have to wait a few minutes before the line actually begins. And I'm not thinking a great deal about it. I've got a few moments to kill, so I do what everybody else does these days. I look at my phone, and so I'm looking at my phone and sharing very important things, and. Very important. Anyway, so I'm looking at that. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that some cars have passed, but I'm just assuming and thinking, well, this is a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood street. There are cars that are passing. There's nothing going on with that. Anyway, as cars continue to pass, I start to pay attention more. And so there's this car in front of me, but all these other cars keep getting in front of that car. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, I'm nice, but I'm not that nice. And so, I mean, a car or two is one thing, but like everybody keeps getting in front of this car. And so I'm getting ready to get in horn blowing position, because that's what should happen at this point, to try to awaken this driver who's clearly not paying attention. And all of a sudden, I notice something. There's nobody in that car. I am sitting there behind a parked car that's in this neighborhood, just sitting on this street and wasting my time. Now, here's the thing. I was doing that intentionally, at least in terms of waiting. Where I was at, I was in that position intentionally. I was sincere about what I was doing, but what I thought I was actually doing, i.e. waiting in line to pick up some kids, I'm not actually doing. What I think that I'm doing, that I'm sincere and intentional about, I'm actually just sitting behind a parked car. This month we've been working our way through the 23rd chapter of Matthew, and this entire chapter Jesus talks about and to the scribes and the Pharisees. This is a series that we've been calling Halo. And you're aware, even if you haven't been here all these other weeks, you're likely aware that the scribes and Pharisees were religious, insanely religious people. It was not merely a compartment, a box in their life. It affected the sum total of their life. They were very observant. They were thinking about God stuff. They were thinking about faith stuff. But as Jesus talks about them, these flagrantly religious people who were acting or operating intentionally and sincerely, Jesus describes them as actors, as pretenders. Now, they're very religious, they're very observant, they're very intentional, they're very sincere. But Jesus says that they are sincerely pretending. Now, they were operating as if they were followers of God, as if they actually had a relationship with God. And they were operating intentionally, operating sincerely, but how they were acting, what they thought they were doing, they were not actually doing. They thought that they were following God when in truth they were little more than sincerely pretending. So that leads us to this question as we land the plane of this series today. How is it in my life, or how is it in your life, that your experience of faith could be little more than pretending? That's the question we want to think about today. Is your faith sincere pretending? Look with me in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23, picking up with verse 25, Jesus says this, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup so that the outside of it may also become clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You're like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of bones of the dead and every kind of impurity. In the same way, on the outside you seem righteous to people, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You build the tombs of the prophets and you decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we wouldn't have taken part with them in the shedding of the prophets' blood. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets." Jesus is, in dealing with the scribes and Pharisees, answering a question that's important for us to think about again today, which is it possible that I could be maybe like a scribe and a Pharisee, and that I'm operating very religiously? I'm operating sincerely and intentionally, but what I think I'm doing, I'm not actually doing. I am sincerely pretending. How can you tell? Based on what Jesus says, there's a couple of ways, and you can figure it out by answering a couple of questions. And the first is this: does the outside get as much attention as the inside? Does the inside get as much attention as the outside? So before digging into this, I want you to notice a couple of things. Jesus says in verse 25, he calls these individuals hypocrites. He calls them in verse 25 hypocrites. He calls them in verse 27 hypocrites. He says that in verse 28 they are full of hypocrisy. In verse 9 he calls them hypocrites. Now, we've talked about this repeatedly, that the word Jesus uses means a play actor or pretender. He says, you guys are play acting. You are pretending. How you are acting is not in keeping with what reality actually is. So he's calling them hypocrites. More specifically, he's calling them pretenders. But then about this, he says in verse 26, he calls them blind. So he's saying that this is what is true of you, that you are playing, you are acting, but you can't even see it. You can't even see it. Now, when we see the word hypocrisy, and obviously it's not a flattering term. If someone, just write this down, if someone calls you a hypocrite, they're not saying something nice to you, right? So when Jesus is referring to them as hypocrites, we actually use that word a couple of different ways. I was reading this past week from a guy named Daniel Doriani, and he described a distinction between two types of hypocrisy. And there is intentional, which is to say malicious hypocrisy, and then there is sincere hypocrisy. Malicious and sincere hypocrisy. Malicious hypocrisy is where someone intends to deceive. That they are trying to create a front, they're trying to put on a mask so that they're leading you intentionally to think something about them or about a circumstance that is not true. Malicious hypocrisy is intentionally seeking to deceive. Sincere hypocrisy is different. Sincere hypocrisy operates this way. You think something is true of you that's not. You've actually deceived yourself. And then you act out that deception, deceiving others. You're doing so intentionally, but you're doing so sincerely because you don't realize that you have actually been deceived yourself. Between these two types of hypocrisy, I think Jesus is dealing here with sincere hypocrisy. He's dealing with guys that are very, very, very insanely religious. These are people that have designated times that they're going to pray every single day. And they would stop what they're doing and make sure that they're going to do this. They would make sure that they are regularly offering sacrifices, regularly going to the temple, making sure that they are regularly thinking about God's Word and the rules and the standards that He has erected. They are thinking about all of this stuff. Beyond this, they were not just compartmentalizing their faith, it affected the sum total of their daily living. And Jesus says, in spite of this, even though you're so insanely religious, even though you're doing all this stuff, He likens them, He says, to effectively a cup or a dish. A cup or a dish that has been used, and once this cup or dish has been used, it goes into the sink, and when you wash it, you only wash the outside. That's kind of how our children wash dishes. So that, I think they think it's seasoning or something. And so, but if all you're washing of a bowl, let's say you've had some soup, if all you wash is the outside, you know what the inside looks like. It's still got all this junk on it. It's still got stains on it. It's still got food particles on it. And left alone, what happens to it? It continues to get even worse. It starts growing more soup or whatever it is that it's growing. And so it continues to get worse. And Jesus says to the scribes and Pharisees, hey guys, that's how you operate. And you're doing all of this stuff, but how you operate is operating as if it's just merely the outside that needs some attention. Because everything that you're doing, and you are doing stuff, it affects only the external. Now let me ask you this. If you're washing dishes and you wash the outside, is that good? It is good to wash the outside. The problem is ignoring the inside. But He gives them another illustration. He says that you guys are also like whitewashed tombs. Around the time of the Passover, every single year, it was customary that what would happen is that they would seek to whitewash or clean off tombs. And the reason for it was consequential for them, and that is that they understood that if they were to touch a tomb accidentally, that would leave them ceremonially unclean. So if they're standing, oh my goodness, I'm standing on someone's tomb, on someone's grave, well, now I've got to go through all this ceremonial ritual to get clean again before I can go back to the temple. And so annually what they would do is to make sure these things get cleaned off so that they're not grown over with moss, not grown over or covered over with dirt. Get it clean so that you can identify it and then make sure that you don't step on it. So it was good that they did that, to identify and mark these tombs, to mark these graves. And Jesus says, you're kind of like that. These grave markers that are clean and look nice and all in order, but underneath, oh, it's terrible. I mean, we dress it up so much, though, with respect to the whole burial process and what happens when someone dies. But you could, for example, drive by Guilford Memorial Park this afternoon, and the grass is cut, and there's all this granite and marble, and it looks so nice. But truth be told, it's kind of a house of horrors what it's covering up, isn't it? It is. It's just terrible. And Jesus says to these very religious people, guys, that's how you're operating. On the outside, everything looks good. Everything looks nice. Everything looks right. Is prayer a bad thing? No. In fact, Jesus says, hey, you guys are so zealous in seeking to gain another convert that you'll go over land and sea to get one. That you're not just tithing, you're going to the spice rack even and tithing off of your spice rack. A little bit more dill, a little bit more pepper, a little more garlic. You're tithing on everything. Is tithing bad? No. Is prayer bad? Is sharing about your faith bad? No. These are all good things. And the Pharisees, the scribes, they were doing many of these external good things. But Jesus says, on the inside, what's going on? He says, you are full of greed and self-indulgence. The core of who you are is filthy. The bitterness that you harbor towards others, the pride that you operate in, the self-absorption that motivates your life. You're doing all these things, but truth be told, you're doing those so that people might even look at you. Oh, they're so spiritual. They're so elevated. I could never be like that. And so you're doing all these external things, but only the outside. Were they doing it sincerely? Yeah. Were they doing so intentionally? Yes. Did they think that they were doing something wrong? They really didn't. They were blind to it. They were sincere pretenders, sincere hypocrites. And one of the ways that you can tell is that the outside gets attention at the exception of the inside. Many of you are aware of the fact that, in particular, back before we moved to Greensboro, Caroline used to decorate cakes and had it as a little side hustle for a while. And I am so glad that season of life is over. It was, don't get me wrong, I love cake for sure, but those were very stressful times, though, because when she's dealing with cakes, that means that I'm having to deal with children. And anyway, so she was really good at this. I mean, and I don't say this because I'm married to her. She was crazy good, like TV good, the stuff that she was able to do. And again, it was kind of a side hustle. It wasn't something that she did full-time or even necessarily part-time, but it was something she was making a little bit of extra money with. And that whole experience, that whole season of time taught me a few things. One, don't have little kids when cakes are being baked. I mean, so like that's a problem. That creates a lot of stress. The other thing that I learned about cake decorating at that time actually had nothing to do with cakes, at least as far as decorating. But one of the things that she was committed to was this. It wasn't merely that she spent a ton of time, and she did, on making sure that the outside looked crazy good, and that it. Oftentimes you would think this is a basket, but no, it's actually edible. I mean, that's chocolate that you're seeing. It was crazy, all this stuff that she would do, but this was the principle she operated on. That it doesn't make any difference how great the outside looks if the inside is dry. Because at the end of the day, what are you going to do with the cake? Well, you're going to look at it before you eat it. And if you go somewhere and there is this beautiful cake, but when you eat it, you're looking for a glass of water to like dip the next piece in. When you're done, when you go home, what are you going to talk about? You say, man, that was a dry, bad cake, wasn't it? Looked good, but that was a bad cake. Why? Because you know the cliche, it is the inside that counts. Listen, with respect to your relationship with God, there are going to be, and God wants there to be, and has communicated that there will be external expressions. That many of the things that the scribes and Pharisees they were doing positive, good things. They were doing stuff that God had prescribed. These are good behaviors to engage in. The problem, though, is that should come from the inside. How it worked with them, it was, we're just going to do this stuff as if it affects the inside. And that's completely backwards, and it does not work that way. You can't do enough good stuff on the outside to change the inside. It starts in here and then is to come out. As you think about your faith, the fact that you're here today suggests that you are thinking about spiritual stuff, at least in some small way. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a relationship with God. You may say that you do. You may say, hey, I'm a Christian. You may say I'm a church member. You may say I've been baptized. I've done all those things. Okay, fine. Here's the question. The totality of your faith, certainly there's some stuff that's going on the outside. The fact that you're here today is indicative of the fact that there's hey, I'm joining with other believers for corporate worship. But what's going on the inside? And honestly, think about it in some just very basic ways. You're here today for a worship service. All right, so you didn't just roll out of bed and roll into here, right? You got out of bed this morning and you brushed your teeth, or you put them in, or whatever you do with your teeth, and then you took a shower, bath last night or this morning, you shaved, you put some clothes on, you're not wearing your pajamas, and you combed your hair or glued it on or whatever you do with that, and but you showed up here after doing all this stuff to the outside. But let me just, a very simple question. Was there anything preparation-wise that you did for the inside at all? Was there even a moment where you said, Lord, today's an opportunity that you might be able to speak to me, and I hope I hear you? There's some stuff in my heart that I need to come clean about. Some stuff just yesterday, maybe even this morning, that I need to be honest and coming clean before you about. It was all the preparation external. If the only expressions of faith that we have are those that are external, that is a problem. Because you may very well be sincere. I mean, I was sincerely and intentionally and giving of my time sitting there behind a parked car, but what I thought I was doing, I wasn't actually doing. You may be active in this church. You may have church membership. You may put money in the offering. You may do all of these things. You may help in Vacation Bible School, but that's not the question. The question is the expression of your faith merely external? For the scribes and Pharisees, it was, because the inside, well, it was like a beautiful cemetery. It was a house of horrors on the inside, but boy, it looked nice on the outside. Ask yourself, are you sincerely pretending? Does your faith, does the inside get as much attention as the outside? There's another question we need to ask, and that's this. Does the evidence corroborate your testimony? Does the evidence corroborate your testimony? In verse 29, Jesus continues his condemnation of the scribes and Pharisees. And he says of them, he says, guys, that you build tombs of the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. Well, what's he talking about there? Well, it's nothing new. And it is the case that when someone passes, just instinctively, especially if you love them, you want to do something that says, hey, this person was here, that their life was lived. And so at the cemetery, we place markers, we put crypts, we do all these things that we can etch in stone. Hey, so-and-so was here. They lived from this time to this time, and just to say that they were here. But people have been marking grave sites for millennia. It's instinctive within us to want to do that. Not only that, but we also recognize that there are people historically that not only lived, but they cast a shadow even to the present day. That their influence was not just merely for their generation, but it continues to impact even people up to today. And so sometimes even long after someone has died, maybe even after successive generations have passed, they will erect monuments. They'll put up a statue. They'll put up some sort of something to say, hey, this person lived and this person mattered, that their life was consequential. Nations do this. Families do this. It's nothing new. And Jesus says, hey, scribes and Pharisees, you do this stuff. And so he says that there are righteous people in the past. So likely that's talking about some Old Testament saints, some Old Testament heroes. And he says that you are building tombs of the prophets and decorating the graves of the righteous. Now, those that he's talking about, it very well could be that he's talking specifically about some whose lives were given simply because of their commitment to Christ, or their commitment to the Lord. That their relationship with God actually cost them their lives. Maybe he was thinking about Isaiah, who was martyred and literally cut in half. Maybe he was talking about Ezekiel. Maybe he was talking about Amos. We don't know. But likely these scribes and Pharisees, some of these Old Testament saints, some of these Old Testament heroes who had even given their lives because of their commitment to God, the scribes and Pharisees are saying, you know, we want to honor that life. We want to celebrate an Isaiah. We want to celebrate an Amos. And so we're going to erect this statue. We're going to put up this big monument as a testament to their life. Or if we know this is where they're buried, we're going to really make it look nice and spruce it up, and we're going to do all this. Jesus says, you do this. Now, is that bad? No, it's not bad. Not only that, though, Jesus says that you go a step further and you say, you know what? If we had lived during that day, this wouldn't have happened. These people were martyred because of their commitment to the Lord, because of their profession of faith in God, and following God cost them their lives. And if we were around, that wouldn't have happened, because we would have been their defenders. We would have been standing on the right side, and we would have been making sure that, especially among those that identified as the people of God, that we're going to honor these people, certainly not kill them. Jesus says, that's what you're saying, But then in verse 31, he says, you actually testify against yourself that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. So you're decorating their graves, and you're saying, man, if we were around when this happened, when their lives ended, they wouldn't have been killed. They wouldn't have been martyred. But then Jesus says, you actually are testifying against yourselves that you're their descendants. He's saying, what you're saying is at odds with the truth. Those that came with a true message from God, you would reject. That's the same reason that you guys celebrated when John the Baptist had his head on a platter. Because you reject truth when it comes to you, just as the people of God in antiquity did. Now, you're saying, oh, this wouldn't have happened, but he says you actually testify against yourself. Obviously, the word testify draws to image of a courtroom, as if you have this scribe or this Pharisee that is seated in the witness box. And what they are doing is saying, I am one that has a relationship with God. I am one who is walking in bounds. I am one who appreciates the truth of God. I'm the one that pays attention to what God says. I'm one that heeds when God sends a messenger. I am all that, and I support those people. But Jesus says, that's your testimony, but it's at odds with the evidence. You're saying this is true when it's actually not. In fact, you would have been part of the very group of people that the prophets condemned. What you're saying is at odds with the evidence. Back in 2014, in January of 2014, Catherine had just turned 2. And 2-year-olds, that's a pretty interesting age. And 2-year-olds are mobile, and they are increasingly verbal, and they're cute, and they destroy stuff, and there's all. Anyway, 2-year-olds are interesting, among other things. Anyway, we had gone into the kitchen, and Catherine was in the kitchen, and there are Oreos, a package of Oreos that has been opened. Well, we actually know the answer to this question, but we look at little 2-year-old Catherine and say, did you eat any of the Oreos? This was the picture of her as she said that. The testimony was at odds with the evidence. Jesus says to the scribes and Pharisees, you're saying by these actions, oh, we honor prophets. We honor the messengers of God. We honor those that and the message that God delivers through the prophets. No, you don't. No, you don't. Your life and who you are on the inside demonstrates and is indicting yourself. That though you are operating sincerely, though you are operating religiously, what you're actually doing, well, it's pretend. It's pretend. Let me ask you this. Do you think the scribes and Pharisees on that day or any other day got up and decided, you know what, I want to perpetrate a hoax on myself and everybody else? Do you think that they wanted to operate in such a way that someone could accurately say of them, you're a hypocrite? No. Beyond that, were they doing religious stuff? Tons of it. Were they praying? Absolutely. Were they giving? Yes. Were they confessing? Were they doing all this stuff? Yes. They were sincere. They were intentional. But they were still pretending. I was sincere and I was intentional. But what I thought I was doing, I wasn't doing. I thought I was in the car line, but I'm sitting behind a parked car. Is it possible that your faith, your professed faith, is sincere, it's intentional, but it's just pretend? Will you bow your heads with me?